Do you hear me? Do you hear me? No? Is it on? All right. I am tremendously pleased to sit on a panel which is presided over by Slaven Kadrakulic, person whom I simply adore, admire. She started from investigating a triangular little segment of Europe, Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, and as if following the recipe of William Blake, who demanded from us to see the universe in the grain of sand, she tried, starting from this little triangle, answer the very essential question with which we all struggle, namely, how come that people who wouldn't harm a fly suddenly become mass murderers? I propose to follow her pattern, which she blazed. I only hope that I will succeed to do so, but I will try. And I wish to give you also one story, one example, brought from France. And starting from there, try to answer the question, how come that after years of high hopes, high expectations, that unification of Europe, falling of the Berlin Wall, end to the division of the world into two warring camps, after all that, we will start really leaving behind the petty animosities, petty hostilities between neighbors, and we will try to acquire the ability, the knowledge, the skills of living with difference daily. Instead of that, what we see around in Europe, we see the resurrection of the tribal moods, tribal animosities. We see the restoration, return to resentment of strangers, and to put it very bluntly, revitalization of intolerance. What's happened? I try to, together with you, try to understand what has happened in the same way as Slavenka Drakulic really did help us to understand how come that people who wouldn't hurt a fly in their daily life under certain circumstances become mass murderers. I told you it will be story of France, and France, like the rest of Europe, at the threshold of the current millennium, was in grips of uncertainty. I said, like the rest of Europe, because I don't believe that in this respect there is much difference between the old Europe, the Western Europe, and the new Europe, the Central Europe and Eastern Europe. We join it. I think the only difference that exists there is that some phenomena going on in Western Europe have been magnified in this part of the former Iron Curtain, simply because the exposure to the conditions of uncertainty, unpredictability of human condition, and so on, has been magnified, telescope in time. The passage was very drastic, very hard, very sudden. And therefore, the same phenomena, the same tendencies here and there look as if they were much stronger on this side, which is the false impression. France was in the grips of uncertainty. Ladies and gentlemen, after the years of relative prosperity and high hopes, habitual foundations of security trembled, cracked, fell apart. The prospects of steady jobs and incomes dimmed, and once solid bonds and partnerships grew sickly and frail. And when a lighthouse, trustworthy, reliable lighthouse showing the way, suddenly mm, didn't stop to to seem to look as reliable as before. It collapsed and trembled under the burden of their own corruption. As to the governments, which were expected to make the insecure secure and put disorderly in order, they responded with a staunch and blunt, there is no alternative, the famous TINA, invented by Margaret Thatcher, which means don't come to me to ask, try to do something about it, try to resolve individually with your own strengths what has been a socially produced trouble. And then in the year 2002, the French relatively young Home Secretary called Nicolas Sarkozy sounded as a message overflowing with just the right meaning. First such message for Frenchmen for years. What he said is what the banks like to say, or at least like to say until the credit collapse. They wanted to present themselves that they are banks who like to say yes, who are listening very carefully and responding to their clients' requests. Sarkozy's message was threefold. First, the hothouse of the insecurity known to torment all of us, the ordinary folks, like you and me, now that has been finally found. Where are the roots of our insecurity? It had been located. It was in 2002 in so-called banlieue, in the suburbs of the French towns, where the immigrants, the strangers, who, according to the definition of stranger given by Georg Simmel, come today and don't go away tomorrow, so they are coming here to stay. Now, they concentrated there, mostly the immigrants from Maghreb, mostly the juvenile Muslims who were considered, viewed as the strength, as the ultimate source of all the disquiet which suddenly started to loom everywhere on the French streets. Secondly, second part of the message was that the deepest roots of the adversities and inequities of Frenchmen's fate have been finally mapped, and so the people in power, the powerful guys like Nicolas Sarkozy, can and will, in the long run, strike at the roots of the matter, roots of the trouble, roots of the evil, which scattered and expanded on French city streets. And it's really, these people in power really intend and are able to do something real. And they are already beginning to do it. If you don't believe, you can see it on your TV screen. What you have seen on TV, there were forces of law and order flexing their muscles when raiding the fortresses of crime and therefore defending the safety of all the rest of the citizens. The third element of the message was that this battle is going to be successful. If Sarkozy spoke about these matters not in 2002, but 3 years later, he would probably say that it would end in triumph, just like the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq are bound to end in victory. He didn't, and that's his good luck. Of the human governments needs to be created artificially. And, creating the enemy, creating the enemy, pointing to the enemy. Enemy which is visible, which everybody can experience. If one cannot, then, of course, the TV cameras are there to oblige. At the same time, an enemy which could be presented as very powerful, but it is weak enough to be shown to be conquered, to be removed by forces of order. There is a great demand for a new kind of legitimacy of government. And the questions of insecurity, of uncertainty, unpredictability of the future, caused by these external factors, all sorts of differences, immigrants, strangers, unknowns, unpredictables, and so on, is very handy and very welcome and looked after justification. Big question, of course, is how long it will last. Big question is how long the efficacy of this new strategy is likely to be effective. I mentioned what's happened in France in 2002, and I told you what's happening now in 2010. It is repetition for the second time with different victim, but the whole strategy, the whole plan of action is identical repetition of what's happened in 2002. However, Sarkozy, however convincing he was as a Home Secretary in 2002, did not deliver on his promise because the juvenile delinquency in banlieue fell down. The danger emanating from there is not considered to be so serious any longer by Frenchmen, but uncertainty of social position, fear of the future, uneven future, unpredictable future, remain exactly as it was before. Now, would the Frenchmen allow themselves to believe for the second time in the same kind of promise when they know that the first promise was simply not working? Now, that's a big question. What the government in France could count on is that we are living in liquid modernity. Liquid modernity is, among other things, not a culture of memorizing and remembering, but a culture of forgetting. So there are chances and there are counter chances at the same time. Predicting how it will develop, it is very difficult, but let's remember that whenever we want to promote tolerance and peaceful coexistence, dialogue between different people who can participate in common life without surrendering their different identity. Now, whenever we are interested in this sort of thing, whenever I try to promote it, we have a very powerful adversary. An adversary is the political body seeking new legitimacy of its power. Thank you.
Thank you very much.